video tour of Abingdon Museum. We're on the roof terrace with panoramic views over Abingdon, and our regular roof volunteer David will do what he does normally when visitors come up to the roof and tour you around this view and tell you something about it. David.
Well, hello and welcome to the roof. I reckon this is the grandest view in Abingdon. Abingdon's a wonderful old town. In fact, we claim to be the oldest town in England, though some do dispute that. And I was in Colchester Museum not so long ago, where they had a big sign up saying, "Welcome to Colchester, the oldest town in England." Well, I soon put them right on that, but I don't think they were very impressed. Our claim is based on the fact that the archaeologists have dug enough holes to show that we've been continuously occupied since the late Stone Age. Now, I'm sure there are other places just as old as Abingdon or even older, but they haven't dug the holes to prove it. So that's our claim anyway. Right. So we have a wonderful view up here. Certainly when you think about places like Colchester, they had a lot more Roman stuff than we do, but the Romans were certainly here. And unfortunately, we don't know what the town was called during Roman times. The name just hasn't come through to history to us. The first name of this town that we know about was Sevaxham. Now I apologise to any scholars of Anglo-Saxon English with my pronunciation, but that was based on the name of a warlord or a chieftain who settled here shortly after the Romans left Britain in the early 5th century. So Sevacio gave his name to the town, and that's how it was for about, well, a few centuries. In fact, the name Abingdon didn't really turn up here until the 690s. And the story goes, and this was written down many years later by the chroniclers of Abingdon Abbey, so you have to take it with a bit of pinch of salt, but the story goes that shortly after the Roman occupation, an early Christian monk settled actually up on Boar's Hill, which we can see in the north on the skyline there, and his name was Aban or Abandon, and he set up a Christian establishment there, a church probably, or a monk's cell or something like that. And in the 690s, but long after Aban had died, there was a pious young couple of people living here, a brother and sister. The sister was named Scylla, and she founded a nunnery on the side of the river, which is now the site where St Helen's Church stands. And Brother Heen is said to have obtained permission to move the probably by then pretty derelict or run down establishment of Abingdon up on Boar's Hill. In fact, the hill in those days was known as Mons Abandon, the hill of Aban, and he brought the establishment down and rebuilt it in the Abbey, what we now call the Abbey Gardens, and the name came with it. So that's how they say Abingdon got its name. You have to accept that with a bit of a pinch of salt, because quite a lot of historians say it's pure fabrication by the monks who were trying desperately to work out the origin of their abbey. And in fact, some say the names of the first 6 abbots of the monastery there were pure fictitious, including number 1, who was Heen, the pious Heen. Anyway, the monastery thrived. There was a rebuild in Anglo-Saxon times, and that in fact was rather knocked about by the Vikings. They plundered and pillaged Reading and then sailed further up the river and took what they wanted from Abingdon. After the Norman conquest, there was another rebuild and then another one. So the final one was what Henry VIII knocked down in the in the 1530s. So that was number 4 on that site. And if you look at the ground penetrating radar pictures, you can see the outlines of the 4 abbeys, each successively larger than the last, all on that same site. So Henry did knock quite a lot down, but some bits survived. What we have here is the lovely late Norman archway, the main entrance to the Abbey complex, and to the left is the church, which was built outside the gate. That's where people who worked for the monastery and their families could worship, people who were not monks. Monks, of course, worshipped in the great cathedral-like church inside, deeper in. And then parallel with the church we have this building here. The lower half was a hospital during the days of the monastery. The upper half is a later addition in Georgian times. And then to the right of that you've got the 2 buildings with the white walls. They're much changed now, but they were lodgings for pilgrims, because one of the functions of a monastery was to give bed and board to pilgrims. And then we have some lovely old buildings over towards the river on the southern flank of the monastery complex. There's the building where the Unicorn Theatre is now situated. Those buildings survived because they were secular, they weren't religious at all. The Unicorn Theatre building was in fact a granary. On the far end you've got the long gallery, which is where the abbot would put up very important guests, visiting royalty. You've got the Chequer building in between, where the man who deal with all the money matters was based, and underneath there's a lovely vaulted room where the abbot stored his wine, because they had their own vineyard here for quite a number of years. It's in fact, the name still survives with the road called the Vineyard, the bottom end of the Oxford Road. And the vineyard itself was situated where Waitrose supermarket now stands. Okay, so this part of the riverside was very busy in medieval times. There were wharves and warehouses, and of course the main route of communication was by water in those days. In fact, it got so busy that at one point boats that were trying to get past Abingdon up to Oxford would be waiting here over a week to just navigate their way through. So in the end they built a bypass. So the idea of an Abingdon bypass long before the A34 was built, and it was a ditch, what we now call the Swift Ditch, which is to be seen at the far side of the second field over there, along the base of the ridge where there's a line of trees, and that was Abingdon bypass. It's now very well overgrown. You can still get a canoe or a little rowing boat along it, but it's nice and deserted and not very easily accessible by the public, and so it's been a wildlife haven. Certainly last century we had a wonderful number of otters living there at the time when they were in great decline and nearly became extinct during that century and throughout the rest of the country, but that was a refuge where they survived nicely. Anyway, after the dissolution, the rooms over the top of the arch became the town lockup. For several centuries that was where people were put away, and in fact it was only in the early 19th century that was replaced by what we now call the old jail, which we can get a fine view of here. That became the county jail of Berkshire, as we were then. We were the county town. This is why this building we're on now is called the county hall, and for a while we shared the county town status with a little upstart place called Reading, but they eventually took over from us, and Reading jail was built, and in the 1870s the Abingdon jail became redundant, wasn't needed anymore, so it hasn't housed prisoners since 1870s. The first prisoners were probably well, we think they were French prisoners of war from Napoleon's army, and the story goes that when the first contingent arrived they were given a pile of stone and told to build your own prison, so I think they did a pretty good job on it. They say it's seen a lot of history, a lot of hangings and a lot of incarceration, so I expect it's full of ghosts. Anyway, let's move on to this other corner of the roof here. I'd like to point out one of the real jewels of the town, which is East St Helens Street. Apart from the pub down there and a couple of shops, every building along there is a dwelling house, and they span several centuries, different styles, and they're really historic and highly protected, of course, listed buildings. They tend to be grander on the left and a bit more humble on the right. The pub down here, the King's Head and Bell, the King was Charles I, and unfortunately it's not a very exciting pub sign hanging out there, but a year or two ago the old pub sign was a lovely picture of the King when he still had a head attached to his shoulders. It's said that during the Civil War, when Abingdon was safely in royalist hands, the King would come out here. He moved around a lot for security reasons, I guess, but so he stayed there a few times, and he's said to have held court in that pub 2 or 3 times. Yeah, Abingdon was a point of rather sad point in his life, because it was here that he decided from Oxford that his wife, who was a French Catholic, Henrietta Maria, and their son should leave England for their safety's sake, and he was able to escort them out as far as Abingdon, and then he had to say goodbye to them, and that was the last time they saw each other, and they never saw each other again. And she made her way safely to the south coast with the boy. It's a famous story. The boy was disguised as a milkmaid, and they got a boat across to France in safety. And of course, a few years later, after the death of Cromwell, that boy came back as King Charles II, who I think we all agree was a much better and more enlightened monarch than his father. This street has actually got another royal connection. There's a house about halfway along. We can't see it from here because of the bend of the road, but it's halfway along on the left, where William of Orange stayed for a few days. If you remember, William of Orange landed in the Torbay area, and he's making his way slowly across the country gathering support, and when he got to Abingdon he was put up there in the house of a fairly prominent lawyer. He garrisoned his troops out of town in places like Milton Manor, and the last night he stayed here, news came during the night from London that the Catholic King James had fled to France. So when he woke up, he was given the news, the King has fled, you my lord are now king. So he abandoned his plans for the next day for going to Oxford and hightailed it straight to London to take the throne. Well, that's the story anyway. Okay, moving round here, further round now, we can see our lovely market square. Here we have a market every Monday, and that's been going on for well over 1,000 years. It was by a charter from one of the late Saxon kings, and the charter was given to the monastery. So in fact they creamed off a lot of the profits from the market, which infuriated the traders and the townsfolk, and that led to quite a lot of disquiet, fisticuffs, and even pitched battles sometimes down there in front of the Abbey gateway. So we still have that market even to this day on a Monday, and other markets as well, farmers markets and so on. It's really a lovely focal centre for the town, and as you can see that now, there's a real cafe culture that develops when the sun shines. Okay, if we move further around, back towards, looking towards St Nicholas Church, the church outside the gate, I'd like to point out the building just to the left of the church, a rather unprepossessing brick building. Used to be the TSB Bank until quite recently. On that spot the monastery had a school, and they used to train young men, educate them until they were able to go to Oxford and complete their education, become scholars and priests. After the dissolution, it all fell apart. The town went into quite a doldrums for 30 odd years, and eventually a benefactor, a man named John Boyce, set up a school, and it was down here in the building on the left with the white walls there, what we now call the Voices rooms, and that was set up in the 1560s, and that school still exists today. It developed into Abingdon School, which we can see over there on the northern side of the town. So that more or less completes the circuit. In better days, I'd like you to come up and visit us on the roof. At present it's not possible, of course, but do come up here, and we'll make you very welcome. There'll be me or one of the other volunteers able to show you the panorama in greater detail than this quick romp through this morning. Anyway, many thanks and goodbye.